Welcome to the Design Doc Podcast, the podcast that shows you how experienced professionals launch their own projects. Today's guest is Barry Rowe. Barry's an Android developer by day and an indie game developer by night. He's also a prominent figure in the Louisville, Kentucky game developer space, and I believe he's on the board for a game developer-focused co-working space in downtown Louisville. Is that right, Barry?
Yeah, that's correct.
Great. Well, thanks again for joining me for this episode of Design Doc.
No problem. Welcome to be here.
So if you want to start, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, how long you've been doing software or game development, and what you're working on right now?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been a software developer for 12 or so years at this point. It's really been the last 4 years that I started working on games. As a day job, I do mobile development. I'm primarily working in Android these days, but I've gone from Java backends to front-end web work, mobile work, hybrid apps, just kind of all over the place doing line of business type stuff. But in my spare time, I started about, like I said, 4 or 5 years ago. I feel like I've lost track of that time really, but teaching myself how to make games because it was always something I wanted to learn how to do. But I think a lot of people have this experience, like even when they learn how to program, it feels like making games is out of reach. But it turns out it's just kind of code like everything else. There's a lot more to it, but you can just pick it up and learn it. So that's what I've been trying to do. And myself and my partner, Loy Lee, goes by Loy Lemix on all of his online stuff, Twitter and such. Started a small studio called Roaring Cat Games, just to release our games under. So we've been making small games and trying to make more and more stuff, hopefully things that are fun.
Yeah, so I also have had a desire for a while to make a video game. And by for a while, I mean like 13 or 14 years. I feel like a fairly confident developer, but the idea of a video game just intimidates me, from spriting to, even worse for me, 3D models or anything like that. But it's important, I think, that you mentioned you have a team, and you said Lloyd was helping you with some of that stuff. So what's his role? I assume you don't do everything yourself and just have Lloyd help publish the game.
Yes. So I do all the programming. And Lloyd does all of the art and kind of visual marketing material. Anything that looks good, that's him. Anything that's behind the scenes, that's me. That's kind of how we look at it.
Cool. Okay, that makes sense. And I guess that could be, in a way, comparable to like back-end development versus designers and like the web world, right?
Yeah, it's very, very similar to that. Especially the way we work. I mean, especially in the indie world, a lot of developers will cross roles a lot because we're all just kind of doing this with what we've got. And money isn't a lot of that. So a lot of people just kind of take on different roles, but we've been lucky enough to have a pretty set. He's working on the visuals and making sure things look and feel good, and I'm making sure things work.
So the part that really interests me about this is what the technology and the processes and tools and things like that you use, as well as like the ways you cut corners to make a personal project of yours something that you can regularly ship games, features, upgrades, DLC, etc. So if you're interested, like let's pick one of the games, at least for now, that you've developed, and just let's talk a little bit about the technology that you use.
Sure. So we can talk about what we've been working on most recently, which is a game we're calling Carcore, it's a little puzzle game about a car putting along in an environment. You got to figure out how to get it across to the finish line. And we are using Unity for this one. For a long time, we were using a library and not really a framework called libgdx, which is Java based. We switched over to Unity for Carcore because a lot of other people use it. Porting to all the different platforms is way simpler. You can get two more platforms if we ever decide to do that, or lucky enough to get on those platforms. And there's a visual editor for all of the UI and in-game scene editing, which is a huge win for Lloyd, because before, without something like that, you end up basically writing a bunch of magic numbers like, okay, I need this, talking back and forth, like I need this image to be 437 pixels wide so that it'll fit in the game properly. There's a lot of weird math coming along if you don't have something that can just visually lay things out for you. And Unity has a super powerful editor, and so it makes a lot of sense.
Okay, yeah, I've heard about Unity before. I haven't looked into it much myself, but something you said caught my attention. You said that you could have two more platforms, possibly. How does that work? How do you just distribute to more platforms?
So with Unity, it's, for lack of a better term, it's kind of Unity magic. So with Unity, they package their whole runtime, and it gets compiled down through their, also for lack of a better term, their compiler. So if you target iOS, Android, Windows, Linux, Mac, or PlayStation, or Switch, or whatever platform you're trying to target, they've done that hard work to make sure that their core engine is compatible, and then we'll take your game and compile it down to the right binaries for those platforms. So they've done the majority of the work, and then you just get to reap those benefits.
Awesome. That sounds insanely helpful. That was one of the things that I can't remember the studio's name, but I know that they released a game that was kind of like a turn-based RPG that was written all in React. And one of the big wins for them, besides knowing the technology, was also just the portability of it. Mm-hmm. So I think it shipped as like an Electron app, and they had that freedom.
Yeah. And that's kind of common across the major engines. That a lot of indie developers use. Game Maker is a huge one that a lot of people use, and it also handles that kind of same thing, kind of the same platform targeting aspect. And like I said, that is the key reason we moved off of what we were using before, which was libgdx, which had Mac, Linux, PC, and then the mobile iOS and Android platforms, but their targeting console from a libgdx game just isn't going to happen.
Yeah, that's mostly just a library for graphics rendering, right?
Right. It kind of sits on top of LWJGL, which is a lightweight Java graphics library. And so on top of that, the libgdx community, they built all these utilities for quickly making a game. And it's not really an engine like Unity, where they've got the way you build things and has to be this way, and then they can handle those cross-platform compilations. So that's kind of where that sticking point comes. You get a lot more flexibility on how you build your game. Like if you really like the code of creating all the stuff in a game, it's going to feel better, but you lose that flexibility of exporting.
So if someone was starting out with a game, would they, like, let's say a 2D platformer, not that that's a simple type of game to make, but I feel like it's a very like well-known genre with like limitations.
It's a common like starting point. Everybody knows what it's going to feel like.
Would you recommend using libgdx or some other tool to get started?
I think my recommendation would be to use whatever you're most comfortable with.
What if you're not comfortable with anything?
I would say pick something like Unity or Game Maker or Godot or even Unreal, maybe. I don't have a lot of experience on that end to say if it's good starting out. But I would pick something bigger if you really don't know where to start, just because the resources out there for getting started are way easier to find and more up to date.
Yeah, I suppose in a way that's similar to like choosing React over some really small library in the front end world. Like there's going to be blogs and a support system and tutorials and stuff like that.
Right.
So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So I haven't done any Unity development, so humor me on this if I sound stupid at any point. But I guess that's also a part of the podcast, is to learn new things from people who know more about it than me.
Yeah, that's what this job is, feeling stupid about 80% of the time.
I think Stack Overflow is a huge help at making us feel stupid.
Yeah.
So Unity gives you like the framework to use. I think you can write in C#. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's primarily C# these days. I think they've discontinued their JavaScript support. It used to have that, but I think nobody uses it anymore, and it may be completely gone. That shows you how much I've looked into that part.
Are there so C# sounds like what you use for most of your games then. Mm-hmm. Okay. Are there other alternatives? Like if I wanted to use a library in C, like can I write some C code that like reaches out to that library, or how would I do that?
That's something I've never done before. The answer is yes, I believe you can do that. I believe there's a way to make there's always a way to make it work. Now, what kind of compatibility you're going to get when you start trying to target different platforms or something like that is questionable. I'm not really sure if I can answer that question directly. That's actually something I've never needed to do because everything is available that I've needed so far in the core engine, or there's an asset available for it, or someone has tackled that problem in a way that doesn't require some external binary. So I don't have a super exciting answer for you on that one.
Yeah, no worries. And answer in general is just exciting. So what I gleaned from that is that it might not be a very common thing to do, or it might not be necessary. So that gives me the insight to know maybe I should look for an alternative instead of calling out to some other unsupported programming language.
Right. And if you really need to do something like that, I would probably take a look at something like some of the VR plugins, because I'm certain that they're having to do something along those lines. It's just been packaged for you by either Unity as a company or someone who's already had to solve that problem. So, and a lot of those packages are available to where you can see sources. So you might dig around and be able to find it if you really need to do that kind of thing.
That's awesome. The fact that something so prominent in the industry is available where you could like peruse the source code, not only as a game developer, but that could be very informative just as a software developer in general. Yeah.
And I think I haven't looked a ton at it. I think they open sourced the entire Unity code base. I don't think you're free to use it, like copy it, but I think you can see it. But I don't know what state it's in, if it's like the 2017 version and latest is not available, or what that looks like at the moment.
So they probably have a license in place that prohibits you from like you forking Unity, that is to like copy the source code and make your own modifications on top of it.
Right. I believe it's open source, but not free use.
So speaking of licensing, how do you license your game? What does that look like? Does Unity try to like tell you how your game is licensed, or can you like slap an Apache license on it or a Creative Commons, or how does that work?
So the code you write is licensed however you like. So we have a handful of small games that we've created over like game jam weekends and things that are out on public repos, and I don't think we've actually put a license in them because it's a 24-hour whirlwind when we're doing it, but they're essentially free for anybody to take and use. Um, so the code you write is distributed however you like. You licensing for using Unity and publishing games that you're making money on becomes a different thing. We don't make hardly any money on our games right now, so we can still get by on the Unity free license. I forget the cap. It's different between Unreal and Unity, and I forget the numbers, but there's a certain cap about basically if you release a game and you make a certain amount of money, once you've made that much money, you have to purchase the higher rate Unity license, which is, from a developer standpoint, that's perfectly fine with me. If I'm making that much money, I'm glad to give a little bit of money to the people who made it possible. So
that's a good way to look at things. I know that for some reason the developer community seems really divisive on that. Some people want to save all their dollars and do things themselves, and maybe some people just want to do it themselves for the experience, and I totally get that. Mm-hmm. But also the idea of saying like, hey, I know that these people, there are developers that work on this game engine just like I'm a developer that works on my game. Here, have some money because you help make a dream possible.
Right.
So with the idea of like starting out for free, I find that a really valuable thing. So it kind of plays into the mantra of like fail fast and fail often, specifically on the fail fast side. No one wants to fail, but there's a chance that you make a game that's not anything special, and especially it might be special to you, but if you're trying to like market it and sell to other users, it might not be their cup of tea. So that licensing pattern is really nice because it allows you to leverage their tools to build something quick, and then once it becomes successful, then you kind of have to chip in. That way, there's no upfront cost. I guess the barrier to entry is really low.
Right. Yeah. It makes it really, really friendly to just get up and try something. And to your point, like just a heads up for anybody who's like, hey, I'm going to go make this game. It's going to be fantastic. Not to be dismissive, but the first several games you make are not going to be good. I'm not sure we've made a good game yet. They're fun for us, and some people like them, but making games is hard. So it's really nice to be able to just build them and see what happens, and then worry about licensing and stuff when it's actually a problem for you. That's a good problem to have.
Yeah, and I'll add that I've played the demo of Carcore, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was a fun little game that allowed you to kind of push an interesting physics engine to its limits. So I think you're doing pretty well.
Well, appreciate it. Hopefully, once we finally get the full thing out there, other people see the same.
Cool. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in just a few moments, and we'll talk about, I guess, coming from a software engineering background and moving into game development and what carries over. And we'll also probably talk about some of the tools that are really common in like a standard web developer or software engineer workspace, and if they exist in game development as well. Hey, we're back. Did you miss us? So I just wanted to add something that I forgot to mention earlier. We've talked a lot about several different libraries, technologies, and even some of Barry's games at this point. I'll be sure to include links for all of these in the show notes so you can check them out. So Barry, we're going to jump straight back into it. So one of the things that seemed really prevalent, it seemed really prevalent in college and then didn't seem prevalent for quite a while afterwards, was the idea of design patterns. Are there any like design patterns that you use when building games? Is that a thing? How does that work?
Is chaos a design pattern? But no. Yes, there are definitely some patterns and ways to make building things easier. I'm not sure I'm an expert by any means, but from when I started to now, one of the best, one of my favorite ways to structure games is using something called what people call an entity component system. And I won't really go into it too much. But the idea is you've got a series of systems that act on entities, and basically everything's an entity. And then you've got components, which are just data bags. And systems know how to process the data on your components, and entities are handed off to these systems based on the components that they have. It makes it really modular, and it's the easiest way I've seen so far to make writing game logic and not get scattered and keep things focused. So a system only knows how to do what it's supposed to know, doesn't need to know about everything else.
Can you give an example of like a system, a component, and an entity?
Sure. So a system might be like a movement system, and so you might have an entity that is just a player entity, or a player object, and it's an entity, and it has a transform component and maybe a velocity component. And so the movement system can then process the transform, which would be where it's at, position, rotation, that kind of thing, and its current velocity, and apply that to know where it should move on the screen next. So that move system is only worried about where are you at, how fast are you going, where are you going to be next, and it can make that small update.
Okay, so yeah, that's way more low level than I originally thought. So that's good to know. I was imagining like a component in that example, or actually, sorry, an entity in that example being like an instance of like a car, and then like the systems being the physics engine, and then like the component being, I guess, just like the state of the game and data regarding like the current car position and things like that.
Right. Yeah. That's not too far off, really. Just it gets a little more fine grained because you want your systems to act on. They need to know the details to be able to move things around or transform things or do whatever they're going to do.
Something that we haven't talked on much, and I think we're still using Carcore as an example for the most part. That's a 2D game, right?
It is, yeah.
Okay. And in a way, I guess a platformer might be the appropriate platformer puzzle, maybe?
Yeah, it's so we've been calling it a physics puzzler, because it's probably closer to Angry Birds style than it is a platformer, but you have platforms and obstacles and things like in a platformer. So it lives in it. It's compared most often to a game called Incredible Machines, I believe is what the game was called, which is this game about making Rube Goldberg machines.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a couple different games right there. That poses an interesting question. Do you get inspiration from other games? Like, what do you? I assume you're a gamer as well. What do you play in your spare time to inspire?
So I do play a lot of games. These days I tend to play a lot more board games than I do video games. But as far as video games, I've been playing a lot of Magic Arena, and I've been playing. Most recently, I've been playing the Untitled Goose Game, which is fantastic.
We picked that up on Switch, and I think it changed my girlfriend's opinion on geese. She used to hate them, and now I think she hates them a little less. So,
yeah, it's super fun, and I tend to play a lot of when I play games. I tend to play a lot of team competitive games. So I played League for a while. I played Heroes of the Storm for a good while, Overwatch, and then kind of a lot of the quick deathmatch style Source Engine stuff. But like I said, I've been playing a lot more board games recently. So
I know that our talk is about Roaring Cat games, and I do want to get right back to that, but I do have a very important question. Have you tried Wingspan yet?
I haven't. I see everybody talking about it, and I I don't know much about it, but I've seen everybody saying it's fantastic. So
Yeah, it's a fun little engine builder game that is accessible by just about everyone. So whether you're a hardcore gamer or a casual one, it feels like there's something for just about anyone.
that sounds perfect.
And that's my sales pitch. Okay, cool. So back to Roaring Cat games and the actual topic at hands. So you mentioned that entity-based pattern. That makes sense to me. That seems like something that is more focused on real-time applications with like constant re-renders and like a game loop. So I don't know if that seems particularly portable to the web world, but I like the idea behind it.
Yeah. So so one of the things I noticed. So I started making games and became super familiar with the game loop concept. Basically, update, render, repeat. Update, render, repeat. I mean, there's a whole lot more going on in the back end, but that's basically it. You've got your state. It comes in. You update the next state, and you render the next version of the screen, and that's happening 60 plus times a second, ideally. And then in the web world, Redux comes along, and it feels so much like a game loop. And for a while, I was really excited about it.
So Redux is the React library, the React.js library for like global state management, right?
Yes.
It holds all of the data like above your application or at the top level of your application and lets it trickle down, and then like single things cause re-renders in that case. Like you have actions that mutate that data in the store.
Right. Yeah. So if you think of if you look at it as a game loop, it really feels like you've got this whole state of the application, and any little thing could change and then flow into your update, which should update the pieces of your screen which have moved, which could be your player moving, next animation frame, particle effects, whatever. And then that just keeps happening over and over. And you take input from the user, update state, keep going. So that's it's interesting that I guess it's Redux is the React library. The Flux pattern is what it implements, I guess. And it became this whole thing in the web world, and everything just started feeling like game loops to me. Which has its strengths and weaknesses on the web versus in a game, I think. But
yeah, I would definitely agree with that, especially with like browsers, certain browsers limiting re-renders and just the way that like re-renders work in general, being a little aggressive with your mutations to or not mutations, sorry, your changes to the data in your Redux store could be very negatively impacting the amount of renders in your application.
Right. And when you start getting into animations, that becomes what does your state look like for anime? But that's a whole separate discussion.
Yeah, that's like an 8-episode podcast on its own. That might be the next one that I start, is how the hell do you animate in the middle of Redux?
Yeah.
Okay. So I like Redux for what it's worth. Please don't send hate mail to me for not talking nicely about it. So there's like a standard idea of software development or programming or coding, whatever you want to call it. And it's I guess it's the idea that you see from like large companies like Facebook and Google and stuff like that regarding patterns and tools and stuff like that. Wow, I've said that a lot. So does any of that stuff carry over to game development? We talked a little bit about design patterns, but what about some of the other things?
So yeah, I think a lot of it does. Um, a lot of it sometimes feels like it doesn't to me. When I'm in the middle of writing something that I've never written before, just because it feels so different when you're worried about, like, is all of this going to happen in 16 milliseconds, right? Um, that's a huge constraint that you just don't live in most uh, like corporate business software development world. I mean, there are people who are having to deal with that level of performance on a lot of their applications, but for the most part, if you're writing a front end, you don't have to worry about that so much. So sometimes it feels like it's a totally different world, and none of the things really work because you need to do it more efficient. But I mean, all of the simple stuff, just structuring your code well, uh, trying to decouple things so that you don't end up with this unrefactorable nightmare, um, and keeping keeping things as simple as you can. Like those are three big, uh, I guess, not mantras, but like ideas that come from everyday software development that definitely pertain to games. I mean, anything that anything that you would do to write normal code in business applications is probably applicable to game code to some extent. Naming conventions, function size. You can unit test stuff. It doesn't have to be all tied to the engine. You can write standalone logic. All of that stuff will help. But I think it's also important to note that in the end goal is some creative thing, and whatever you got to do to make it work is the important part. Something I've heard. I don't remember where I heard it from now. I wish I remembered, but like it was basically the concept: you only get so many games you can build in your life, so just make them, just build them. Uh, Learn how to make them easier as you go, but just get them out there.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. That's a really big inspiration for this podcast in general. Was it's mostly themed on personal projects that people are working on and the steps and shortcuts they take to just ship something. I spent many years as an early developer teeter tottering between imposter syndrome and overconfidence. But during the overconfidence times, I felt like I should have like pushed so much stuff out, and I never did. I had a couple ideas for apps. I finally ended up building a Meteor.js app. I guess maybe 5 years ago, and it was so small, and it was nothing impressive either. But I don't know. I guess I was intimidated by the fact that I didn't have a company as a support system or a product owner giving me guidance or anything like that. So it's always inspiring and mostly the point of the podcast to hear people talk about that type of stuff.
Yeah, and it's totally different when you're the main consumer of the code base, right? And you know what you're willing to live with, so you've only got yourself to hurt. But if it gets it there faster and you can live with it, that's okay.
Yeah, I joked in our last episode with Matt Ballmer when we were talking about Dungeon Pad that you are your own linter, right? Like you don't need a linter if it's just you because you're your linter. You know
Right.
what looks good and what doesn't. Okay, so you mentioned unit tests. That's an area of interest for me. I write a lot of unit tests on a weekly basis, and am curious to know from a game developer point of view, how do you write tests?
All right, so you definitely pulled that out there, and I will say you can write tests, and I've looked into it several times. I have never written a test for any of my games.
Would you
uh,
say that that helps you ship code quicker because you're not worried about like writing tests and you just as the only person touching the code, you have a good idea of like what changes will break things.
Um, I think for the small games that we have gotten out there, yeah, I think mm, unit tests I don't think would have really done anything except for make me feel better about. Um, oh man, look how cool it is! I've even got unit tests for this code. Um, for Carcore, there's definitely some areas where I wish at this point we had some test coverage, but uh, also, I should note that Carcore, while we have released a couple other Unity games in the mean since we started it, um, it was our first foray into using Unity. So all of the original architecture is just uh, a bit of a mess. So I'm slowly pulling it out, and if I find time, I might start writing some tests. But I think for the most part, it's unless you're on a team and other people are dependent on your components working and everybody's agreed on it, it's not it's not something that I would really worry about in games. And there's so, not to mention there's so much floating point math that you probably pull your hair out anyway.
Yeah, you mentioned the words "if I have time," which I find resonates really well with me as well. I go to a coffee shop every Thursday and work on something. For a very long time, it's been a React front end over a Go GraphQL API for a tool that helps writers leverage machine learning to write their best novel yet. It's not out, so if anyone gets excited about it, follow along, and I'll let you know when it actually is out. But I have a Trello board for my work, and it's not super full because I'm not a product person and I just put things in as they come to mind. But I've the longest story that I have in the to-do list has been refactor some Go resolvers to use a new pattern that I really like. That's the thing, though. Like I work in this on my spare time, so do I allocate my couple hours a week to doing something that I really like, or do I allocate my couple hours a week to like doing something that helps me get this project closer to shipped?
Right. Yep. That is a constant struggle. We have a similar Trello board situation, and our backlog is full of things that say, "Hey, we should change how this works. Hey, we should change how this works. We should change how this works." But all those things currently work, and no playtesters have complained about them, so they still sit there.
It's so funny because at work I hate hearing the like if it ain't broke don't fix it saying, but I basically live and die by that with personal projects, because if it ain't broke and I am fixing it, I'm not shipping new ideas.
Right.
In the realm of tests, and I mentioned linting, which is not a huge thing. Do you have a build pipeline? How do you like? Is there like a Jenkins or Travis continuous integration server that produces binaries for you, or APKs? How does this work?
So we don't have that. You can build it. There's so for Unity specifically, because this changes depending on what your engine looks like, for sure. But for Unity specifically, there's kind of a challenge, because whatever server is running this build has to have Unity installed, and there beyond some licensing issues with doing that. I think you have to have a certain level of licensing to be able to run a build server like that publicly. Beyond that, just the whole setup is a bit of a bear. So what we've done instead is you can write your own. I forget the name of it, but it's essentially an editor script for Unity that will, it just kind of scripts out the pressing of the buttons inside of Unity. So we have a menu item in our game. We can go up and say, "Hey, build everything," and it'll produce an APK, a Mac app, a Linux zip, a zip for Windows and an iOS project. Um, and so then from there we can push those to what we need to push it to. So we've automated some of the building because it's available to us locally, but we don't have a normal CI pipeline.
Gotcha. So, for anyone listening that may not be aware, an APK is an Android package. So those are the types of apps that get installed onto Android phones. There are a couple other alternatives like Android app bundles, but an APK is still pretty commonplace. I'm kind of shocked, honestly, that Unity doesn't provide like a software as a service as a CI tool.
So they do. There is, I think you have you have the option for I think they just call it cloud build. Um, you can if that's wrong, you can throw it in the show notes that I got that totally wrong. But they have a service that if you have a pro or higher license, you can use. And for us right now, it just hasn't been worth it to pay that licensing solely for the cloud build. We get by on what we're doing now without much problem, so it hasn't been a need for us. But it is out there. There are solutions for doing it. We just haven't needed it at this point.
Okay. One more question for you, and then we'll take another break. So, how long does it take to run that Unity script and actually produce like all of your shippable executables?
I think it takes with the iOS one takes like 50% of the time. I think it takes probably 10 minutes. So there is a 10-minute time where I'm just twiddling my thumbs waiting on Unity when I create a build.
Yeah, that definitely seems like a case where cloud build makes a lot of sense, and for like massive games built in Unity, I can't even imagine.
Oh yeah, for sure. Because once you get into things, we're just doing a 2D game right now, right? And once you get into things like having to bake lighting and just do any of the pre-processing stuff that you might want to do in 3D games or more complex, visually more complex games. Yeah, it's going to just get longer and longer.
All right. Well, we will take a break really quick, and then we will be back in just a few minutes, and we'll probably wrap this up, trying to be cognizant of your time, and talk about just some of the issues you've ran into, and then I guess the publication process a little bit, and just a couple more questions around that.
Looking forward to it.
And we're back. Okay, so we're just going to dive straight into these next set of questions. Feel free to answer however you'd like. None of them are meant to be like prying or anything. But it is one of the areas that interests me the most. So every project seems to run into issues from time to time. Have you encountered anything major or that felt like it was a showstopper or any real pain to work around?
Yeah. So it's not actually a technical problem that we're having right now, but game design is a super hard thing. So we've had the game in a really nice working state. We have most of the systems ready to go, and now we need to build a bunch of levels beyond where we're already at, and we're starting to kind of slow down in our creative process. So that's been the biggest hurdle. And I do think one of the problems that we have is could be attributed to a technical problem, is that when we go to build a new level, we never invested in building the editor extensions that would be really nice for us to have to build new levels quickly. So it takes a long time to build a level just to find out it's no fun. So it would have been nice if we had thought ahead and built some better tooling for us to like quickly whip up levels.
Yeah, interesting. That also kind of reiterates on a point from earlier, the idea of like fail fast and fail often. So if the level is not fun, like spending a lot of time making a level only to test it and find out it's not fun is probably a real letdown.
Yeah, it's never good when you have to scrap a whole level, because especially when you're only working, 1 or 2 nights a week, and you spend half a night building out a level and you play it and you're like, well, there's only one way to be like, that was easy. That was not satisfying. Guess we'll start again.
Yeah, and on that note, the progression of difficulty and things like that are another thing that it sounds like you factor in whenever you're talking about level design. And that's like, it's just something that as a non-game developer, but like a software engineer, you never want things to be difficult. So like you never think of ways for things to be challenging. Like I don't want a user to have to click through 4 modals to like submit a form. That's not a fun challenge. And then at that note, making the challenge fun as well. It's interesting to hear.
Yeah, it's a whole it's an eye-opening thing when you start to go try to make a game and realize like, well, this isn't fun, or that's not even close to what I thought people would do. It's as scary as some of the technical stuff was when I first started. Like, I don't know how to make games. That the code's going to be so hard. That's by far the easiest part of making games. Is figuring out how to make things do stuff code-wise. The hardest part is designing fun stuff, finding people to play your game, and marketing, which is that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, that definitely is. And that might actually be one that comes out, like a marketing from a software engineer's point of view. I've done a lot of that really recently and have really enjoyed it. So maybe one day there will be some content there. So with so the idea is to have like Destiny 2 levels of a player base, like people that are highly dedicated to your game and in the millions. So do you get user feedback to help you achieve like that goal or push towards that goal? Or how do you hear what users think about your game?
So for the handful that we've released out there, it's primarily we don't. If people write a review on Google or Apple on the Play Store or the App Store, we'll know. But other than that, we assume people aren't playing them. But while we're building a game, some of the best motivation for keeping going is showing the game at events, something like the Louisville Arcade Expo or Maker Fairs, or if we just have Louisville Makes Games hosts playtest nights on a semi-regular basis. Just having people come in and play the game and just watching what they do, especially little kids, because they are super honest and they will tell you if something is not good. Adults are much more likely to tell you, oh, this is pretty nice, I'd buy this, whether they like it or not. But a kid they're gonna laugh, or they're gonna put the thing down in 30 seconds and move on, which is helpful either way.
Yeah, I wish there was a way to get more like a younger audience to test most like web and software apps for the same reason. It's hard to get or hard to feel like you've got a genuine opinion on a lot of things.
Yeah, that's true.
So you mentioned marketing, and we can definitely save that for another podcast and another life. But I am curious, like, do you take any efforts to acquire new users to play your games? Like any marketing on the Play Store or Google Ads or Facebook ads or anything?
To So far, we have not. The most we do is we have a mailing list that I think we've only sent out one time to a handful of people, and really it's just kind of Twitter and Facebook every now and then for events or announcing that we've released something. From everything that we've read, like targeted ads on Facebook or Twitter or most of the platforms just don't work, at least at the scale for we're looking at, that we can afford. So right now we're really just focused on making the best game we can, and then we're going to try really posting it in some places on Reddit, different online communities, and just try to get some people playing it. Reach out to some YouTubers, and hopefully the right person sees it, and then a bunch of people happen to find it. That's our best hope right now, with the time and resources that we've got for putting into marketing.
That marketing pattern that you mentioned, posting on Reddit, that's fairly common. But like trying to get your, like, no one, maybe not no one, but most people don't try to get their web app in front of a YouTuber so they can, like, I don't know, click through like some management platform or something.
Right.
So that definitely feels unique to game development.
Twitch plays business apps.
Yeah.
That's the new channel.
Well, they did do a Twitch plays like Robinhood, like stock market type thing.
Yeah.
So,
true.
Maybe that's an option. Man, another great segue. Speaking of stocks and money and things like that, do you monetize any of your games?
We do a little bit. So we released the first quote unquote major release we made, which was this tiny game called Galaxy, which it was like a infinite space shooter, just planting trees and stuff in space. It's kind of like a bullet hell game. We tried ads for that. We made, to date, I think we are up to $1.92. So that did fantastically. For the next handful of games, I think we just released them for free because the time it took to develop the ad support in libgdx at the time versus the payoff was just not worth it. So, hey, let's just see if people like our games. With Carcore, we are putting it on itch.io, and there's a demo available now, and it's been the most successful, honestly. We've put it in a few bundles, so people will pick up the demo from those bundles, and we get a little bit of money from that. And then when we put it on the app stores, we are going to go with freemium again, but the in-app purchases are going to be basically a tip to the developers. We're just going to try that. We are going to put ads in it again. We're going to try that a second time. An in-app purchase to turn off the ads, and then just cosmetic things. It's really just buying. If you want to pay $1 for some cash to open and unlock skins, because we have some skins in the game.
That's an interesting approach too, and I really like the idea of like, hey, if you liked our game, like, it was free, you can give us a tip if you want. We'd appreciate it. It kind of goes back to what we mentioned earlier about, like, if you enjoy the free product, like, chip in, throw a little bit back to the person that made it.
Right.
So, okay. Another quick question for you. What's the indie game dev community like? Are there meetups or like anything like that?
Funny you should ask that, Brad. There are but yes, there are meetups. It's fantastic. I should start off with. Uh, there's a ton of people building super interesting stuff in our area. And to be clear, I'm talking about the Louisville, Southern Indiana, Kentuckiana area. Um, and in Louisville, we have a meetup every first and third Sunday um, of every month. So I, th- I think this upcoming Sunday, a week from tomorrow, um, at the time of this recording, if I have my calendar right. But those meetings are free, open to the public, and we see all kinds of people coming in, building cool stuff. And it's across the board. Small hobby stuff that people are just having fun with. Big giant projects that people are building for, like trying to make this their big first game. And then people have been doing this for years and just showing off what they're making that right now. So there's a lot of people making games in the area, and with the meetups, we're just trying to introduce everybody to everybody else because it's easier to build stuff if you got help.
Yeah, and just a support system or other people that are doing the same communal struggle, basically.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, if I ever start on the 2D platformer that I've wanted to build for 14 years, I will definitely attend one of those meetups.
Yeah, come on down, show it off, or just see what other people are doing.
So I guess going back to Carcore in particular, I think this would be a good game for this question. If you could go back and change anything about this project, would you?
Yes. I mentioned I mentioned that we have several cards sitting on our Trello. Hey, we should go back and change this. I would change all of those things. The way we're structuring our levels. I would build in tooling for how we build levels faster. And I would probably focus way more on getting more levels sooner versus features sooner. One mistake we definitely, one thing, it's really nice that we have a skinning system available already, but that's not necessary to play the game. And we probably should have focused on building levels first and added that later. Not probably, we should have. There's a ton of code structure things I would do differently now, because I've learned so much about from where I started. Like I said, this was the first thing we built in Unity, so just like the first thing you build in any tool or platform framework, it got a little messy at the beginning, and as you figure out what does and doesn't work.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds pretty fair, and I feel pretty safe to say the same thing about most of the projects I've worked on, despite not being game dev related. It feels like there's usually a ton of things that I would go back and do again.
Right. The longer you do something, the more you know, and if you don't know it at the beginning, obviously you can't do it. So starting a project from scratch always feels better than going in and redoing something you've already messed up. So
yeah, I think that's like that perfectionism, is that a word? Is something that I struggle with, and because of that, I have like a lot of my projects directory on my computer is basically a graveyard with a couple caretakers that are alive and well. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that feeling. That's been one great takeaway from working on games is going in, I knew I had no idea what I was doing, so my ability to care whether it was perfect has has really been able to get out of the way and just make it work. To some detriment, but for the most part, it's beneficial.
Good. That's a good approach to have. So we've talked a lot about the tools that you've used. Do you have any guides, tutorials, or documentation that you would recommend for people who are interested in getting into game development?
So this is probably the most common question we get with running the meetups is, how do I get started? And I'm going to miss some of the things we tell people because we tell people a lot of things. But one of the things we always say is just pick something and start making a game. If you don't know what to pick, Game Maker, Unity, Construct, those are three game making tools that have a ton of free documentation around them, and are easy to pick up. Relatively easy to pick up. And just start making something. Make a box move around the screen. The first time you make a box run across the screen and stop when you stop and go the other way, it feels great. And you're like, oh, I made that happen. I know how that happened. I can make anything happen now. Let's just do it. It really just helps to just get started and not get stuck over designing this massive game, because the first thing you make should be tiny and small, and it's probably going to be really fun to you, and it's probably not going to be a great game. But you'll have made it, and now you know how to make the next one. And if you're having a real hard time just getting started, I would recommend jumping into a game jam, which is these are held all the time by different people, but the big ones are Global Game Jam, which happens in January, and there are Ludum Dare or Ludum Dare, depending on which way you want to pronounce it. They happen 3 to 4 times a year, I think. And just finding somebody else, and for a weekend, you start on a Friday, and by Sunday evening you build a game. So you don't have time to think about whether it's right or not. You just go for it and build what you can. I've seen so many people start not knowing what they're doing, and then by Sunday they're super amazed at what came out of it. They've made a game, and once you've made a game, you can make another game.
That's really interesting to hear, and a really good point. I have attempted game development a little bit in the past, and little things like that every time I think about it blow my mind that I was so excited about were just insanely inspiring. Like you said, being able to move a blue box across the screen, or hitting the space bar and watching the box go up, 1/8 of the screen and then fall back down 1/8 of the screen. Little things like that. And
it's
go ahead.
Yeah, it's those you get it in other software development. Those fist pump or high five or just like, yes, it worked moments that are really the best part about the job. That's that feeling, and when that box moves, that's the feeling you get. Except it's way better because it's a game and it's more fun.
Yeah, no doubt about that. So I guess my final question for you is, if people are interested in following you or your work or Roaring Cat Games, where can they do that? Do you have a GitHub or Twitter handle, a personal website, mailing list, anything like that?
Sure. So for Roaring Cat Games, we have roaringcatgames.com. That has links to our Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, our itch pages, all our games, everything. And for myself, I'm Barry Rowe on pretty much everything, I think. But Twitter is probably where you'd find me the most. It's at Barry Rowe, BarryRowe. And I have a GitHub at the same, Barry Rowe, and there's a Roaring Cat Games GitHub as well. So you can actually go fork some of our games and download them and run them if you want. And I should also mention LouisvilleMakesGames.org, which we've talked about a couple times. But if you're interested in the meetups, or if you're interested in game development in the Louisville, Kentuckiana area, LouisvilleMakesGames.org. It's a nonprofit, and we're just trying to help people make games in the area. And you can find our information there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for your time, Barry. I guess this officially wraps up our second episode of Design Doc. I'm your host, Brad Seipert. You can find me on Twitter at Brad Seipert. That's BradCypert. At bradseipert.com. And of course, you can find Design Doc anywhere that podcasts are heard. Thanks for tuning in.